Good morning, my fellow Canadians. Well, some of this, forgive me, will be a recap of things I put on previously. The parable about the camel's nose in the tent. If you haven't looked it up, look it up. Camel's nose in the tent. The meaning or the underlying message is crystal clear for anybody who can understand basic English. The other, which is the first military dictum, is know your enemy. So what I'm going to be talking about here is Islamists versus Muslims. There's a difference. There's a big difference. Now, I have firsthand knowledge of this, having lived and worked, having dated in the Muslim culture, having lived and worked in Muslim countries, and having looked into this fairly extensively on my own. And I've met and worked with, dated with Muslims. To lump them all together is foolishness, okay? There's the obvious enemy, the jihadis, okay? The ill-educated, angry monsters who commit heinous crimes, rape, decapitation, bombings, shootings, stabbings. They're easy to recognize for what they are, okay? This is a very easy to recognize enemy. You can point to them and say, well, there's an enemy. The ones that scare me are the ones that I'm seeing here in Canada and Mississauga. Those are the ones that scare me the most because it's a subversive and insidious Islamist agenda being perpetuated upon Canada and Canadians with the full compliance of some moronic politicians. Now, to me, right now, between, like, say, the NDP and the Liberals, there's nothing. I just lump them all together as the absolutely loony left because there's nothing, to my mind, to choose between them in terms of idiocy. The Muslims asked for, and were granted, the right to broadcast the calls to prayer during Ramadan. Reasonable, yes? No. No. And I will explain. I watched a tremendous interview between Laura Lynn Thompson and Yasmin Mohammed. And Yasmin Mohammed had Sandra Solomon. Anybody who's familiar with Islam and the problems with Islam in Canada will be familiar with those names. Sandra Solomon translated a letter put out by an imam. I'll get to that a little later. I'm going to make a prediction. I'd love to be proven wrong, but I bet you I won't be. This Muslim call to prayer that was permitted during Ramadan, I will bet a month's pension that in the not too far distant future, they're going to be asking that the call to prayer be allowed to be broadcast during Eid, the festival. And then it's going to be requested that the calls to prayer be allowed to be broadcast during certain religious festivals or weddings or whatnot. And this is the insidious infiltration of the Islamist agenda into Canada. Now, when I said there's an obvious enemy and there's the subtle enemy, the ones who are bound and determined to implement their idea of a religious, a theocracy. They're bound to perpetuate this in every country they go to. Now, they are honor-bound, duty-bound, under the tenets of their religion, to spread the word of Muhammad and to overtake, to infiltrate, and to subvert a culture and turn it into a Muslim state. I think Ummah, the caliphates, the Muslim states, they are duty-bound under the tenets of their religion to do this, not just to preach, not just to proselytize, to attempt to convert. They will use our own tolerance against us. They will use our political system against us. There is proven linkages between Muslim organizations and politicians, which is basically purchasing your your imprimatur, your tolerance for our way of life, for our viewpoints. So you're getting politicians, they're basically bribed. They won't call it a bribe, but that's what it is. And if you go after them for this, you're called Islamophobic or right-wing or neo-Nazi or whatever, the name calling, rather than looking at this for what it is and saying, this is an insidious infiltration of our culture by those with an agenda that would see the destruction of Canadian culture and Canadian values. Like, that's not hard put. That is baldly, accurately stated. This is their agenda. We're not talking, like I said, about violent people. These are educated, intelligent, reasonable sounding people. People like me, people who are aware, people who know the culture, recognize this for what it is. This is not the one who's coming at you with a gun or a knife with fire in their eye. They're coming at you reasonably, calmly, and taken piecemeal, their requests are reasonable. Taken as a whole and looking at the broad, the long view, what they hope to achieve, no, they are no friends of Canada, and they will destroy Canada as we know it. I mean, the Liberals have been allowing this for ages. This interview with Laura Lynn Thompson and Yasmin Mohammed, Sandra Solomon translated a letter from one of the imams to his congregation. It was never meant for dissemination to the Canadian public. And Sandra Solomon, being an ex-Muslim and growing up in the Arab culture, could translate it perfectly. Now, they are given to flowery language and hyperbole in their rhetoric. It's an integral part of the culture. But you should read this, honest to God, you should read this. They see this as another victory for Islam, allowing the call to prayer to be publicly broadcast. This is another victory for our side. This is another nail in the coffin of Canadian values. That's the way, essentially, that's what he's saying. We must keep the pressure up. We must keep going with this. We are succeeding. We are making inroads into the Canadian culture. And we are succeeding in our goal to turn every country in which they are embedded into an Islamic governed country, where Islam is the state religion. And initially, if they do get that, they say, well, we have room, we will tolerate other religions. And they do, until they don't. Everywhere that Islam has embedded itself, the radicals within Islam start destroying, either through violence or through social pressure, start destroying the other religions and the practice of other religions, because this is their sacred duty under the tenets of their religion. And the politicians don't get this. Every concession, I've said this before, every concession is and will be met with a request for more concessions until they get the power. And then it will not be requests for concessions. It will be demands. Demands. They will be demanding this. There's been stupidity like, we're having a funeral. Could you please cover the Christian crosses on the headstones in the graveyard, in the cemetery, because we find it offensive. There was someone who, I can't recall exactly, they actually got the authorities to get their dog to stop barking on the Saturday when they were having their services, because dogs are unclean in the Muslim culture and they found it offensive. Dog barking. Tough shit. Suck it up. This is Canada. You don't like the fact that dogs barking? Move your freaking mosque. And it's that kind of stones that stand up to this kind of subtle bullying. It's that kind of balls that our politicians are lacking. The kind of guts to say no more to this stuff. It is, to me, with my knowledge of history and tactics, observations and life experiences, I see what's happening here. I really do. And there are groups like Pegida, there are One Godless Woman, whom I refer to very often. I mean, just listen to what she posts. Sandra Solomon, Yasmin Mohammed, Laura Lynn Thompson, and the Muslims I have met who are freaking terrified of the idea of a Muslim state gaining more power and more traction in Canada because they are not by the tenets of radical Islam or strict Islam. They are apostates. Many of them came here to escape the repression and the strictures of Islam, to be free to practice their religion as they saw fit. Good Muslims. They wouldn't eat pork, they don't drink alcohol, they pray 5 times a day or 3 or 4 times a day, whatever is convenient. But their faith is still there, they just don't follow the hard line. Well, these people are in trouble if Muslims gain an inroad, and there's both out and out overt violence, which they will offer them, and there's social pressure. So you got Muslims who are keeping their mouth shut, moderate Muslims who support Canada, moderate Muslims who came here to escape the really harsh Sharia-dominated theocracies like Saudi Arabia, like Iran. And they are afraid, but they're quiet. They're quiet about this because they have more to fear than, let's say, your secular Christians or secular Canadians. And the politicians don't seem to get this. You're allowing an enemy to walk in, the Trojan horse, whatever you want to call it. They are making inroads into our society that have to be looked at coldly, baldly, by someone with some real true hardline life experience who can look at this and say, no, 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 we don't allow that. One of the things they brought up, and it was very interesting, I grew up, when I was growing up, of a Sunday, you would hear church bells, near, far, all the different churches. Not for a long, long time, not for hours, but you'd hear church bells pealing. I grew up with that. And they mentioned how, in this interview between Yasmin Mohammed and Laura Lynn Thompson, you don't hear that anymore. And it never even occurred to me, yeah, that's been long gone. Was it the separation of church and state? Did people complain as we became a more diverse society? Were there people who complained about, the Sunday morning church bells disturbing their sleep or much needed rest or whatever, or noise bylaws? But I haven't heard church bells pealing in a long, long time. But they'll allow the Muslim call to prayer. And it's only for Ramadan. Wait and watch, and you'll see. It won't be only for Ramadan. Back to my prediction. Our culture, with the spineless politicians and the loony left idiots we've got right now on Parliament Hill. I mean, they sold Nunavut, a gold mine, to Chinese interests. And they'll be bringing in Chinese workers. You're not supposed to criticize China because it's racist. Bullshit. Not racist. The Chinese government, not the Chinese people, the Chinese government has absolutely no sense of global responsibility. It's been a hotbed for diseases that they've exported to countries all around the world, killed X number of people, and taken absolutely zero responsibility for what they've done, trying to whitewash what they've done. Chinese people in Canada are being pressured to keep their mouths shut. Now, in the old Soviet Union, in the old days, if a resident of the USSR was forced to, either for professional reasons, to travel into the West, or was granted special permission to travel to the West, to the democracies, they had relatives kept back home as hostages for their good behavior. If you defect, your families back home will pay the price. If you critique us publicly, your families back home will pay the price. This is standard communist methodology. Apparently, this is happening right now here in Canada. Chinese people who would speak up against the government, I heard anecdotally from a friend of mine that a personal acquaintance who was rather vocal in their condemnation of the Chinese government got a call from their relatives in China, basically, please shut up. We are being threatened. We are being threatened with prison. We are being threatened with violence. We are being threatened. Please shut up. Do not criticize the government publicly. Now, I don't know if this is true, but is Facebook, oh, it must be true, it's on Facebook. No, but there was something I saw that Canadian government is permitting Chinese security services into Canada to monitor the Chinese community. If that's true, if that is true, that is going to be one among the litany of stupidity done by the Liberal government. That will be among the tops. And I hope CSIS is on top of this. I really do. I would love to see a government come in that would take the leash off CSIS and take the leash off the RCMP, get an arm's length relationship with the RCMP and the government again, let the cops do their job, let the security services do their job, and start deporting some of the trash that we've allowed into this country. Subversive garbage. Man, oh man, oh man. I go on and on about what's happening to my Canada and how I could weep. And these stories that come out, are they true? Are they not true? Investigative journalists should be looking into this, because if this is this destruction, and it is the destruction of my country and my culture, should outrage everybody who loves this country. So that's my morning. Take from this what you will. Be well, stay safe.